Water mixable oils allow you to get the benefits of oil painting compared to acrylic painting without the hassle of using toxic paint thinners like turpentine used with traditional oils. You can dilute them with water and clean the brushes with water, soap and cooking oil. But can you pour the paint water down the drain? With traditional oils, absolutely not, because turpentine and other paint thinners are hazardous waste. But how about water mixable oils? I found some contradictory information about the safe disposal of water mixable oil paints. It is a relatively new medium, which might be why. Oil paints consist of pigment and vegetable oil, usually linseed oil or safflower oil. Some of the pigments can contain toxic heavy metals or other metals that are toxic in high quantities, like lead, cadmium, cobalt, chromium and manganese. They are toxic to humans and pollute the environment and are hazardous waste. Some of them are carcinogenic or can cause neurological issues. There are less toxic synthetic, organic alternatives now, so those inorganic pigments are not as commonly used anymore. These old paints my late grandmother used to paint with have, for example, cadmium deep red hue, which is actually naphthol AS and doesn't contain cadmium. The water mixable oil paints I use also don't seem to have any of those toxic metal pigments. Linseed oil and safflower oil are not toxic, but there is a fire hazard with them. So if you use a rag or a paper towel, you should either hang them to dry after painting to let them oxidize, or wet them with water and keep them in a closed container so they can't spontaneously combust. Water mixable oil paints may also have an emulsifier that makes them partly hydrophilic, making them dissolve in water, and the emulsifier evaporates and disappears when the paint's dry. To my understanding, those are not toxic either, which makes sense. Water mixable oil paints were developed as a less toxic and less polluting alternative for oil painters. But once the paints dry, they turn partly into traditional oil paint and partly into plastic. So, at least you should not pour water mixable oil paint water down the drain, regardless of the pigments or possible solvents. It can clog the drain and pollute the waters just like acrylic paint. But is it hazardous waste? Some sources say oil paint contains only pigments and oil, and in the case of water mixable oil paints, those emulsifiers. So the paints themselves don't have turpentine or solvents in them unless you add them during painting. And you don't need to add turpentine for water mixable oils. While I'm painting, I use water as a solvent, like with acrylic paints, sometimes also water mixable linseed oil. And I keep or clean the used brushes in a liquid of pine soap and water during painting, and after painting I clean them more thoroughly in vegetable cooking oil and finally in a mix of dish soap and water. Then I pour out the oil paint water into an empty yogurt bucket, take it outside to the balcony with a lid loosely on and let it evaporate. The dried paint is left on the bottom and I can keep pouring paint water on top till it fills up. If it's not hazardous waste, it can go in the mixed waste once it's fully dry. You should, however, still paint in a ventilated space because the paints can emit formaldehyde, for example, which can cause headaches and allergic reactions. Gloves are also recommended for oil painting. I wear gloves when I expect it's going to get messy and I'll get paint on my hands. And the cooking vegetable oil I use for cleaning the brushes, I wipe off with a paper towel and put that in mixed waste. I clean the palette by scraping off the dried paint and collect it into a glass jar. I'm not sure if this could be recycled into new paint or not, but I might try it someday. You can keep the linseed oil in a glass jar and keep reusing it. I did notice that it does dry and solidify eventually though. Now, some sources say oil paints always contain small amounts of turpentine or other solvents besides the pigment and the oil. Turpentine and other paint thinners are volatile organic compounds and therefore hazardous waste. They create toxic fumes that are dangerous to breathe and can cause respiratory issues, for example. If you use traditional oils with toxic solvents, then you would keep the solvent in a glass jar and keep reusing it, let the paint settle on the bottom and pour out the clear solvent into a clean jar, close the lid and use that the next time. And the paint sludge would be hazardous waste that you collect and eventually take to hazardous waste collection. So I'm a little confused by the mixed information. The paint tube or the packaging itself does not say exactly what the paints contain, and I can't find it online for this brand either. It does claim to be solvent-free though. But if I'm wrong and it turns out the paints themselves are actually hazardous waste, I'll change my ways. If you found this helpful, please like or hype the video. But if you want to know more about water mixable oil paints, here's what I learned about them in the last 10 years. See you then. Thanks for watching.